My family despised me at Christmas because to them I was nothing but a loser. Little did they know I had secretly become a billionaire and was funding my brother's children. I agreed silently and cut off all help. Now he's desperate. The strained whine of an aging engine sliced through the stillness of the bitterly cold Los Angeles Christmas Eve night. A beat-up 2010 Honda Civic, its paint sun-bleached and a crumpled bumper catching the glare of holiday lights, came to a stop before the Wright family home. Ethan killed the engine, his eyes scanning the gaudy, extravagant decorations plastering the house he was raised in. Lights flashed in a frantic, chaotic rhythm. Plastic reindeer munched on a lawn, blanketed in artificial snow, and a colossal inflatable Santa waved with a jerky, mechanical motion. Ethan drew a sharp breath, tugged at his frayed scarf, and climbed out of the car, his only luggage a small, battered suitcase. As he trudged up the walkway, his scuffed boots left deep imprints in the fresh dusting of snow. The stark contrast between his lean figure and the home's Christmas spectacle was jarring. Ethan paused, his gaze drawn to the living room window. Through the drapes he could make out moving silhouettes, the muffled sound of laughter reaching him. Before he could press the bell, the door was thrown open. Richard, his older brother, stood framed in the doorway, clad in a cashmere sweater and pricey linen slacks, a flute of sparkling wine in his hand. "Well, well, if it isn't our Ethan," Richard boomed, a smile stretching across his face that never quite touched his eyes. "I thought I saw an Uber out front. Who would have guessed it was you in that automotive antique?" Ethan managed a tight smile. "Merry Christmas, Richard." Come in, come in." "Everyone's dying to see how the years have treated you," Richard laughed, delivering a pat on the back that was a little too firm to be friendly. Stepping into the living room, Ethan was assaulted by a blast of warm air and the scent of roasting turkey. The interior decorations were even more ostentatious than the exterior display. A towering Christmas tree, nearly 10 feet tall, dominated the room, surrounded by a mountain of perfectly wrapped gifts. Tiffany, Richard's wife, glided over, her expensive heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. She embraced Ethan briefly, a cloying cloud of expensive perfume washing over him. "Ethan, dear, how interesting to see you here." Her eyes did a quick, dismissive scan of Ethan's plain clothes, lingering on a small, nearly invisible patch on his elbow. Before Ethan could form a reply, two blurs of motion collided with him. Olivia and Jacob, his 12 and 10-year-old niece and nephew, hugged him with an authentic burst of joy. "Uncle Ethan, you really came," Olivia yelled, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Jacob tugged on Ethan's sleeve. "Did you bring gifts from abroad? What's it like over there?" Ethan smiled genuinely for the first time, some of the tightness in his shoulders easing. "Hey, you two, you've grown so much. And of course I brought gifts, but it's a secret for now, okay?" Richard cleared his throat, commanding the room's attention. "Kids, give your uncle some space. I'm sure he's tired from his long journey. Bus ride, I assume?" The children reluctantly pulled away, their faces full of an admiration that was a world away from the adults' expressions in the room. Karen, the family matriarch, finally made her approach, her gaze sweeping over Ethan from head to toe, a mixture of disappointment and something else. Guilt, maybe, in her eyes. "Ethan," she said, her voice a carefully controlled monotone, "I'm glad you could make it this year. I hope it wasn't too inconvenient for you." Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. "Visiting family is never inconvenient, Mom." Karen gave a stiff nod. "Well, put your things in your old bedroom. We haven't changed anything upstairs. We figured you'd like to keep it familiar." As Ethan made his way to the stairs, he overheard Tiffany whispering to Richard, "He looks so the same. I thought that after all those years abroad, he'd at least—" Her voice faded as she realized Ethan was watching from the upstairs landing. Ethan paused beside a gallery of family photos, noticing his absence in all the recent ones. His gaze settled on an old snapshot of two smiling boys, arms slung around each other. Ethan's fingers brushed the glass, a sad smile touching his lips. Just then, his phone vibrated. He pulled it out, glancing around to ensure his privacy. The screen lit up with a notification. Mr. Wright, the acquisition of Synapse Dynamics is finalized. Value $2.7 billion. Congratulations. Ethan quickly blanked the screen, shoving the phone back into his pocket. He inhaled deeply, straightened his posture, and descended the stairs, ready to face his family. Back in the living room, all conversation ceased as he reappeared. Richard held up his flute. Well, now that the family's complete, let's have a toast to our diverse achievements. Nervous laughter rippled through the room, accompanied by pitying and scornful glances aimed at Ethan. He took the offered glass, his expression a carefully constructed mask of composure. As the family drank, Ethan's eyes held a secret glint that no one there could possibly decipher. The night was young, and Ethan Wright, the family's supposed failure, held a much stronger hand than anyone could ever suspect. Karen started serving the dinner, the aroma of roasted turkey perfuming the air. Conversations sparked back to life, but Ethan felt the covert stares and the carefully measured words aimed in his direction. Tiffany, in particular, seemed to oscillate between a morbid curiosity and outright disdain. So, Ethan, tell us about your life in... Where are you living now again? Silicon Valley, Ethan replied smoothly, slicing into his turkey. Ah, yes, Silicon Valley, Tiffany continued, her voice dripping with syrupy sweetness. Must be interesting. I imagine it's challenging to keep a proper wardrobe in that climate. She glanced pointedly at Ethan's simple attire. Richard laughed, refilling his flute with sparkling wine. Come now, Tiffany. I'm sure Ethan is doing the best he can with what little he has. Not everyone can afford Italian suits? Isn't that right, brother? Ethan maintained a polite smile, but his eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Everyone has their priorities, Richard. The room's tension was thick, broken only by Olivia and Jacob's innocent excitement as they peppered their uncle with questions about his life abroad. As the evening progressed, Ethan observed the family dynamics with a clinical detachment. He saw how Richard checked his phone with growing frequency, a flicker of worry crossing his features before he'd force another smile. He watched Tiffany nervously twisting her expensive rings as if confirming their reality. And through it all, Ethan was calm, almost detached. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, but he didn't need to check it. He knew his empire was expanding, unseen by the family that judged him so harshly. The Wright family's Christmas dinner was just getting started, and with it, long-buried secrets were about to be unearthed. Ethan knew that by the end of the night, the masks would begin to slip, and the real purpose of his return would come to light. The aroma of roast turkey and holiday spices saturated the Wright family dining room. The table, draped in a pristine white linen cloth, was adorned with the family's finest china, reserved for what Karen always called special occasions. Ethan surveyed the familiar yet oddly alienating scene as he took his seat. Richard, at the head of the table, lifted a crystal glass filled with a red wine that likely cost more than most people's monthly rent. Well, family, another year has passed, and here we are, celebrating our achievements. His eyes flicked toward Ethan for a fraction of a second, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. Some of us more than others, of course. Tiffany let out a delicate laugh, a sound like tinkling crystal bells. She reached across the table, the diamonds on her wrist flashing under the chandelier's light. Oh, darling, don't be modest. Tell Ethan about the Hartley case you won this month. Richard's back straightened, his chest puffing with pride. Ah, yes, a tough mergers and acquisitions case. The client was so thrilled, they gave me tickets to the next Formula One Grand Prix. VIP suite, naturally. Ethan nodded politely, his expression a mask of manufactured interest. Under the table, his fingers brushed almost unconsciously against the smooth surface of his smartphone. Karen served a generous helping of turkey for Richard. My son has always been brilliant. Remember, Ethan, how he always got the highest marks in school? Hard to forget, Mom, Ethan answered softly, his eyes briefly meeting Olivia's, who rolled hers in a subtle show of solidarity. Tiffany leaned in, her sapphire earrings swaying. Ethan, dear, tell us, what exactly have you been doing over there in... Where was it again? Silicon Valley, Ethan repeated, his voice calm. Ah, yes, Silicon Valley, Tiffany pressed on, her tone still sickeningly sweet. It must be interesting. I imagine it's tough to maintain a decent wardrobe in that climate. Her gaze darted to Ethan's simple sweater once more. Ethan opened his mouth to reply, but was interrupted by Jacob. Uncle Ethan, have you been to the Griffith Observatory? I saw pictures online. It looks awesome. A genuine smile illuminated Ethan's face. Yes, Jacob, it's truly remarkable. Next time I come back, I'll bring photos for you. Richard cleared his throat with a loud, pointed sound. Speaking of remarkable things, Tiffany, why don't you show Ethan the early Christmas present I gave you? Tiffany beamed, extending her arm to showcase a diamond bracelet. Isn't it dazzling? Richard got it at Tiffany's. Limited edition. Karen sighed with admiration. Oh, Tiffany, it's magnificent. Ethan, isn't it wonderful to see your brother doing so well? Ethan nodded, taking a sip of wine to stall for a reply. His phone buzzed silently in his pocket. And you kids, Karen said, turning to her grandchildren. How are your studies? Still planning to follow in your father's footsteps? Olivia sat up straighter in her chair. Actually, Grandma, I was thinking of studying environmental engineering. There's an incredible program at MIT. MIT? Richard interjected with a frown. I thought we agreed on Yale. Family tradition, remember? But, Dad? No buts, Olivia. Yale has the best law program in the country. It's the only real path to success. Richard shot Ethan a pointed look. We don't want you drifting off course, do we? An uncomfortable silence descended upon the table. Ethan felt the weight of everyone's stares, a mix of pity and poorly concealed disdain. Tiffany, seemingly oblivious, continued, Oh, yes, Yale is wonderful. I remember Richard's years there, the parties, the connections, essential to his success now. Ethan took a deep breath, his fingers instinctively tightening around the phone in his pocket. Its screen silently illuminated, displaying a notification. Quantum Leap shares up 15% after acquisition announcement. And you, Ethan? Karen's voice cut through his thoughts. Any progress in your career? Still working for that startup or whatever it was? Ethan offered a soft smile. Things are moving along, Mom. Slowly, but surely. Richard laughed, the sound echoing through the dining room. Ah, the eternal optimist. I always admired how you can see the bright side of, well, anything. He gestured vaguely with his hand, a motion that encompassed Ethan's modest appearance. Not everyone can be a high-powered attorney, Richard, Ethan replied coolly. Obviously, Richard retorted, a glint of superiority in his eyes. But come on, Ethan, it's been what, 10 years since you left home? Surely by now you could have found some notable success. Ethan held his brother's gaze, his face an unreadable mask of composure. Success is relative, Richard. It's not always measured by conventional standards. Tiffany laughed, a loud, forced sound. Oh, Ethan, always the philosopher. But you know, dear, a little ambition never hurt anyone. Look at Richard, for example. Hard work, dedication. See where it's gotten him? Karen nodded proudly. It's true. Richard always knew what he wanted and went after it. Became a lawyer at 25, partner at 30. A real success story. Ethan gave an enigmatic smile, his eyes glinting with a secret none of them could fathom. Everyone has their own journey, Mom. Mine? Well, let's just say it's still unfolding. Richard scoffed as he refilled his wine glass. Well, I hope this journey eventually takes you somewhere, brother. I'd hate to think you're wasting your potential. Ethan's phone vibrated once more. He discreetly slid it from his pocket, giving the screen a quick glance. Mr. Wright, the merger with Fusion Core has been approved. Estimated value, $5 billion, awaiting your go-ahead for public announcement. Ethan locked the screen, a nearly imperceptible smile gracing his lips. He looked up, finding his family watching him expectantly. "Don't worry, Richard," he said quietly, raising his glass. "I'm sure it will all become clear in due time." The rest of the family exchanged puzzled glances, unsure how to interpret the confident edge in Ethan's voice. As the conversation shifted back to Richard's triumphs, Ethan sat in silence, his eyes shining with the knowledge of a future no one else at the table could possibly imagine. Dinner proceeded, the conversation oscillating between praise for Richard and thinly veiled critiques of Ethan. While Karen cleared the main course, Ethan seized the momentary distraction to check his phone discreetly beneath the table. The screen lit up with a flood of notifications. Mr. Wright, the merger with Apex Solutions is finalized. Value, $3.2 billion. Global Connect shares up 22% after your statement. Urgent video conference request from London investors. Ethan scrolled through the messages, absorbing the data with practiced efficiency, his face remaining impassive after years of hiding his true emotions. He locked the phone and pocketed it just as Tiffany turned her attention back to him. "So, Ethan," she began, her condescending tone barely masked by a fake smile. "Tell us more about this work in Silicon Valley. What exactly do you do there?" Ethan took a sip of his wine, carefully choosing his words. "It's quite varied, actually. Mostly consulting." Richard let out a loud, barking laugh. "Consulting? Is that the new euphemism for unemployed?" Olivia and Jacob exchanged uneasy glances, clearly uncomfortable with their father's abrasive tone. Ethan smiled softly. "There's a lot more to the business world than corporate law, Richard," Tiffany interjected, her sugary voice now dripping with venom. "Oh, sure, dear, but you must admit it's a bit mediocre compared to Richard's success, right? I mean, look at this house, the clothes, the cars." She gestured grandly at their surroundings. Ethan noticed, with a trained eye, subtle signs of financial strain others would miss. A tiny chip in the paint in one corner, Richard's wristwatch, which Ethan recognized as a high-end replica, not the authentic piece. "Success has many faces, Tiffany," Ethan replied calmly. "Not all of them are visible at first glance." Richard scoffed. "Cheap philosophy doesn't pay the bills, brother." Just then, Olivia chimed in, her bright voice cutting through the tension. "Uncle Ethan, have you visited Caltech? I've read they have an amazing program in environmental engineering." Ethan gave his niece a genuine smile. "Yes, Olivia, it's an excellent institution. Maybe we can visit together someday." Richard frowned. "Olivia, we've discussed this. Yale is the way to go. The tuition might be steep, but it's worth every penny for your future." Jacob, sensing the shift in mood, added, "Dad, did you see how much the dorms at Yale cost? It's almost the price of a house." A flash of panic crossed Richard's face, quickly suppressed. Ethan watched the exchange, his mind, honed by years of high-stakes negotiations, rapidly calculating. Tiffany let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, don't worry, kids. Your father is more than capable of paying for Yale. Right, darling?" Richard forced a smile. Of course. Nothing is too much for my children's future." Ethan observed the interaction carefully, the years of reading people in boardrooms kicking into high gear. He saw the tension in Richard's shoulders, the anxious flicker in Tiffany's eyes, and the way she nervously touched her expensive jewelry as if for reassurance. Karen, returning with dessert, seemed oblivious to the undercurrents of stress. "Ethan, dear, do you remember that foundation that used to help underprivileged students? The one you mentioned a few years back?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes, Mom. The Beacon Initiative." "Why?" Karen sighed. "Oh, nothing important. I was just thinking how nice it would be if organizations like that still existed to help families going through temporary hardships." Richard coughed, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Mom, we don't need charity. We're perfectly fine." Ethan tilted his head, intrigued. "Temporary hardships, Mom? Is there something I should know?" Tiffany quickly jumped in. "Oh, don't be silly, Ethan. Your mother is just musing out loud. After all, look at us. Success, love, luxury, kids at top-tier universities. What else could we want?" But Ethan saw through her fragile facade, the forced smile, the way Richard avoided his gaze, the hint that Karen wanted to say more, but held back. His phone vibrated again discreetly. He checked the message. Anonymous transfer to the Beacon Initiative completed. Amount $5 million. Destination, the Right Educational Fund. Ethan gave a faint smile as he pocketed the phone. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he sat, maintaining a humble facade while secretly bankrolling his family's dreams and ambitions. "Well," Ethan said, breaking the silence that had settled over the room, "maybe not all success needs to be announced to the world. Sometimes the greatest accomplishments are the ones we keep to ourselves." Richard rolled his eyes. "Always the philosopher, aren't you, brother? But philosophy doesn't buy sports cars or vacation homes." Ethan shrugged, his face a picture of calm. "Perhaps not, but it can buy peace of mind, and that, Richard, is something no amount of money can guarantee." The room fell silent for a moment, the tension palpable. Tiffany toyed nervously with her diamond bracelet. Richard stared into his wineglass as if it held the answers, and Karen glanced from one son to the other, worry etched on her face. Ethan observed it all, his mind working. He knew that beneath the veneer of success and happiness, his family was teetering on the edge, and he, with his hidden empire, was in a position to help. But the question remained, when and how to reveal the truth. For now, he would keep his own mask firmly in place, the mask of the unremarkable brother, the son who had failed to meet expectations, because sometimes the greatest strength lies in being underestimated. The Wright house glowed under the soft light of candles and the cheerful twinkle of Christmas decorations. The scent of cinnamon and apple from the freshly served holiday pudding mingled with the rich bouquet of the Screaming Eagle Cabernet Richard had insisted on opening. "A small indulgence to celebrate," he'd said with a smug grin. Ethan took it all in with a mix of nostalgia and detachment. His family, gathered with faces flushed from wine and rich food, could have been the perfect picture of holiday bliss. But he knew that beneath the polished surface, hidden tensions and secrets were threatening to shatter the carefully constructed facade. Richard stood, crystal glass raised, the Christmas lights glinting off the diamonds of his watch, a pricey replica, Ethan noted again, but a replica nonetheless. "Family," Richard began, his voice full of that particular confidence that bordered on arrogance. "Another year has passed, and here we are, celebrating our successes and our unity." His gaze traveled around the table, lingering momentarily on each face before finally settling on Ethan, a smile that didn't reach his eyes spreading across his lips. "This year was especially significant for me. The Hartley case, which many deemed impossible to win, was a triumph that cemented my position at the firm." He paused dramatically. "And, of course, I can't forget the promotion that followed immediately afterward. Junior partner at 35, a record in the firm's history." Tiffany applauded lightly, her smile as bright as the jewels around her neck. Karen nodded with maternal pride, while Olivia and Jacob exchanged bored looks, having heard this story countless times over the past few weeks. "But," Richard continued, his tone shifting subtly, "the real victories aren't just professional. They're personal. They're about family." He turned fully to Ethan now, raising his glass in his direction. "Which is why I'd like to make a special toast tonight." Ethan felt every gaze pivot toward him. He kept his face neutral, years of high-stakes deal-making having taught him not to betray emotion. To Ethan, Richard declared, his voice loaded with false sincerity, "My younger brother, who honors us with his presence after—" "How many years has it been, Ethan? 5? 6? 8? Ethan answered calmly. 8 years, Richard exclaimed as though surprised. 8 years living your adventure abroad. 8 years of consulting and self-discovery. The air quotes were almost audible in his tone. Tiffany let out a little giggle, quickly disguising it as a cough. Karen looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. To Ethan, Richard went on, who never let failure dampen his optimism, who continues chasing his dreams no matter how many times they slip away, who reminds us by his presence that not everyone can be a winner, and that it's okay. Richard's smile was a razor, sharp, and aimed directly at Ethan. To Ethan, the eternal loser of the family. May his persistence in the face of failure inspire us to cherish our own accomplishments. Richard raised his glass, expecting the others to follow suit. Tiffany was the first to lift hers, followed by Karen, who looked torn between discomfort and loyalty to her eldest son. Olivia and Jacob hesitated, casting apologetic looks at their uncle. Ethan observed the scene for a moment, his face impassive. Then, slowly, he raised his own glass. "Thank you, Richard," he said, his voice steady and clear. "It's always enlightening to see how you define success." Something in Ethan's tone caused Richard's smile to falter for a heartbeat. "To family," Ethan continued, letting his gaze sweep the table, "and to the many forms of victory that aren't always obvious at first glance." He took a sip of his wine, maintaining eye contact with Richard over the rim of his glass. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the clink of crystal. It was Karen who finally broke the silence. "Well, who'd like coffee? Or maybe a bit of brandy to go with the pudding?" As Karen stood to fetch the drinks, Richard reached for the wine decanter for a refill. In doing so, his elbow bumped against his leather briefcase, leaning against his chair. It toppled over, scattering a few papers across the floor. "Damn," Richard muttered, bending quickly to gather the documents. Ever the gentleman, Ethan moved to help. "Let me give you a hand, brother." As both brothers bent to retrieve the papers, Ethan's trained eyes caught snippets of information. Final notice, past due payment, mortgage at risk. Richard snatched the papers from Ethan's hands with more force than necessary. "I've got it," he said curtly, stuffing them back into the briefcase. Ethan stood slowly, his face betraying nothing of what he'd seen, but his mind was already working, connecting the dots. Back at the table, Tiffany cast a worried glance at Richard. "Everything okay, darling? What were those papers?" Richard forced a smile. "Nothing important, dear. Just some documents I brought home from the firm to review." Ethan noticed the strain in his brother's voice, the way his fingers gripped his wine glass more tightly than necessary. Richard's glossy success story was starting to crack, and Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before the whole truth came tumbling out. The grandfather clock read 3:17 a.m. when Ethan finally rose from bed. The house was almost oppressively quiet, broken only by the occasional creak of old wood. He slipped into the hallway, his steps noiseless, years of moving through high-pressure corporate situations having taught him the art of stealth. His destination, Richard's home office downstairs. The door gave way easily at his touch. Richard had never been too concerned about security in his own house. Ethan entered quietly, closing the door behind him. Pale moonlight filtered through the blinds, casting elongated shadows across the mahogany furniture and shelves of law books. He turned on the small desk lamp, his experienced gaze immediately taking in revealing details. Stacks of unopened envelopes, a half-empty bottle of whiskey hidden behind a row of books, a checkbook with several hastily torn-out pages. Seating himself in Richard's leather chair, Ethan felt the irony of the moment. How many times in their youth had Richard scolded him for invading his personal space? Methodically, Ethan began sifting through the scattered paperwork. His financially trained eyes soon discerned an alarming pattern. bank statements showing steadily negative balances, collection letters from multiple creditors, some stamped "Final Notice," a mortgage document for their parents' house, signed by Richard under power of attorney, betting receipts, some dated just a week ago. With each new revelation, Ethan felt a mixture of shock and a strangely grim sense of validation. He had always suspected Richard's success was built on shaky ground, but the extent of the financial disaster unfolding before him was beyond his expectations. One particularly conspicuous envelope caught his attention. It was addressed to the Beacon Initiative, the organization Ethan secretly used to channel funds to his family. Carefully, he opened it and read, "Dear Mr. Wright, we appreciate your generous monthly donation to the Wright Educational Fund. Your continued efforts have ensured that many promising young minds. Donation amount this month, $50,000. A cool $50,000. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, letting the reality sink in. For years, he had quietly subsidized his family's luxurious lifestyle, allowing Richard to maintain his illusion of success. Continuing his investigation, Ethan found more disconcerting evidence. Tiffany's credit card statements showing extravagant spending on jewelry, designer clothes, and upscale spas. A lease contract for Richard's new sports car with overdue payments. Tuition bills for Olivia, and Jacob stamped urgent, past due. The picture was clear. Richard was drowning in debt, much of it fueled by gambling and poor financial management. Tiffany, seemingly unaware of the full scope, kept on spending as if there were no tomorrow. And in the middle of it all, Ethan's niece and nephew risked losing their educational opportunities. Ethan leaned back in the chair, his mind racing. He opened a private banking app on his phone, one that few in the world even knew existed. With a few taps, he reviewed the recurring transfers he made to the Beacon Initiative. For a moment, his finger hovered over the Cancel Future Transfers button. The decision in front of him was monumental. Continuing to help would mean perpetuating the charade, enabling Richard and Tiffany's spiral of reckless spending. Cutting them off might be the shock they needed to face reality. But at what cost? Ethan thought of Olivia and Jacob, of their aspirations and dreams. He thought of Karen, likely clueless that her home had been used as collateral for Richard's gambling debts. Letting out a heavy sigh, Ethan made his decision. His fingers danced across the screen, setting a new transfer plan. Complete cutoff of funds for Richard and Tiffany's personal accounts. Ongoing transfers for Olivia and Jacob's tuition, but now directly to the universities. One last substantial transfer to Richard and Tiffany's account with an attached note. Use it wisely. There will be no more. Task done, Ethan meticulously rearranged the office to its original state before leaving. He did one last thing. He slipped a business card for a renowned gambling addiction therapist discreetly under Richard's blotter. Back in his room, the first rays of sunlight crept through the curtains. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of his actions and the night's revelations pressing down on him. He knew the days ahead would be tumultuous. Richard and Tiffany would soon realize their financial safety net had vanished. The carefully built facade of success and luxury would start to crumble. But as the rest of the house slept on, ignorant of the seismic changes about to unfold, Ethan felt a strange sense of peace. He had taken the first step in dismantling the lies that had poisoned his family for so long. Picking up his phone once more, Ethan opened his email and began composing a message to his executive team. Prepare for my early return. We have important acquisitions to finalize, and start the process of setting up a new headquarters in our hometown. It's time to bring the business home. With a click, he sent the email, sealing not only his return to the corporate world, but also the beginning of a new era for the Wright family. The masks were about to come off, and Ethan was ready to face the consequences, whatever they might be. The morning light had barely broken when Richard's phone rang, yanking him out of a restless sleep. He groped for the device, his face still pressed into the pillow. "Hello?" His voice croaked in confusion. "Mr. Wright? This is National Bank. We have an urgent matter regarding your account." Richard sat up abruptly, a cold sweat forming on his forehead. "Yes, of course. What is it?" "Sir, we tried to process your usual monthly deposit, but it was declined. The payer canceled the standing order." Richard's heart pounded. That mysterious, always generous monthly deposit that had sustained his lifestyle for years had stopped. "There must be a mistake," he stammered. "Can you check again?" "I'm sorry, sir, but the order was definitely canceled. Also, we see several bills set to auto-debit in the next few days, including your mortgage. Without that deposit, your account will go significantly negative." Richard hung up, his mind reeling. How is this possible? That money had always been there, month after month, year after year. It was his safety net, his lifeline. As he tried to process the news, the doorbell rang, a sharp buzz that echoed through the house. Still in his pajamas, Richard trudged downstairs to find a delivery driver with an envelope in hand. "Richard Wright? Delivery for you." With trembling hands, Richard ripped open the envelope right there in the doorway. It was a bank notice. The mortgage on his parents' house was in arrears, and if payment wasn't made in 30 days, foreclosure proceedings would begin. Closing the door, he leaned against it, feeling his legs threaten to give out. How could everything collapse so quickly? In the kitchen, Tiffany was making breakfast, unaware of the unfolding drama. "Honey, don't you think we should update our winter wardrobe this year? I saw some fabulous pieces in the new collection." She stopped as soon as she saw Richard's expression. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost?" Richard forced a smile. "It's nothing, dear. Just work stuff, you know." But Tiffany wasn't clueless. Over the following days, she began noticing subtle changes. Richard, always so confident, seemed distant, nervous. He made hushed phone calls from his office, locked away. Bills, once paid without a second thought, now triggered anxious arguments. One afternoon, while flipping through the mail, Tiffany discovered a letter from Olivia's university. Curious, she opened it. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Wright, we would like to inform you that the tuition for the current semester is overdue. If payment is not received within 15 days, we regret to inform you that your daughter may be barred from attending classes." Tiffany felt her blood run cold. How was this possible? Richard had always assured her the tuition was covered, that everything was under control. "Richard," she called, her voice trembling. "Can you come here for a moment?" When Richard entered the room and saw the letter in Tiffany's hands, his face went pale. I can explain." Before he could elaborate, the phone rang. Richard answered, his voice tense. "Hello?" "Yes, this is him. No, please, I just need a few more days." "I understand, but—" Tiffany watched, reality sinking in. The constant phone calls, the letters, the palpable tension, everything pointed to a truth she didn't want to acknowledge. Meanwhile, in the living room, Olivia and Jacob whispered to each other. "Have you noticed how weird Dad's been acting?" Olivia asked. Jacob nodded. "Yeah, and I heard him on the phone last night, arguing about late payments." Olivia frowned. "Do you think we're having money problems?" "Impossible," Jacob replied, though his voice betrayed uncertainty. "Dad's a successful lawyer, right?" Upstairs, Ethan watched it all unfold through a discreet vantage point, feeling a mixture of guilt and resolve. He knew his actions had triggered this crisis, but he also believed it was necessary. The truth had to surface for the family to heal. That evening, during dinner, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Richard barely touched his food, his eyes flicking repeatedly to his phone. Tiffany cast anxious glances his way, trying to maintain a light conversation with the children. "So, kids, how was school today?" she asked, her voice forcedly bright. Olivia and Jacob exchanged glances. Olivia began haltingly. "Actually, there was a problem with my card at the cafeteria today. They said it was declined." Richard nearly knocked over his glass. I'll take care of it tomorrow, honey." "Don't worry." Tiffany cleared her throat. "Richard, maybe we should postpone our vacation plans this year. You know, with all the university expenses and—" "No!" Richard interrupted, his voice sharp. Everyone at the table jumped. He exhaled heavily, regaining control. "I mean, there's no need. Everything is under control." Ethan, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "Are you sure, Richard? It seems like something's bothering you." Richard shot Ethan a glare. "I'm perfectly fine, Ethan. Not everyone has to worry about money like you do." The remark hung in the air, laden with an irony that only Ethan truly understood. After dinner, as everyone dispersed, Ethan heard Richard on the phone again, his voice a desperate whisper. "Please, Mr. Smith, I just need one more week. I'm sure I can get the money." "No, don't tell anyone about the bets. I'm begging you." Ethan closed his eyes, the weight of his decision pressing on him. Richard's downfall was only beginning, and he knew things would get worse before they got better. That night, as the house finally fell silent, Ethan pondered the road ahead. The Wright family's facade of success and prosperity was unraveling fast. Soon the masks would all come off, revealing the truth in all its harshness. He picked up his phone, typing out a message to his assistant. "Schedule a press conference for next week. It's time the world learned who Ethan Wright really is." With a sigh, he hit send. The next act in this family drama was about to begin, and Ethan knew it would be the hardest one yet. Saturday morning dawned gray and cold, as if the sky itself reflected the mood in the Wright household. The doorbell's shrill ring shattered the quiet, jolting Richard from his seat in the study, where he'd spent a sleepless night buried in paperwork and desperate calculations. Hesitantly, he made his way to the door. When he opened it, he was greeted by two men in suits, their expressions serious and unyielding. "Mr. Richard Wright?" asked the taller of the two. Richard swallowed. "Yes, that's me. We're representatives from Apex Creditors. We're here to discuss your overdue loans and immediate payment options." Richard's face turned ashen. He glanced nervously over his shoulder, making sure no family members were nearby. "Please, this isn't a good time. Can we schedule a meeting at my office on Monday?" The second man stepped forward, his voice firm. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wright, but this situation can't wait. Your loans are severely in arrears, and we need to discuss immediate measures." Just then, Tiffany appeared in the hallway, drawn by the voices. "Richard, who are these people?" Richard's eyes darted from Tiffany to the collectors, panic rising. "Nothing important, honey, just colleagues from work." Tiffany frowned, her intuition telling her something was off. Colleagues? On a Saturday morning? Before Richard could come up with another excuse, the taller collector addressed Tiffany. "Ma'am, I'm Mr. Harris from Apex Creditors. We're here to discuss your husband's overdue loans and potential legal consequences." The silence that followed was deafening. Tiffany stared at Richard, shock and disbelief etched on her face. "Loans? What loans, Richard?" Richard opened his mouth to answer, but words failed him. In that moment, the entire facade of success and stability he had built over the years began to crumble. Tiffany, regaining some composure, turned to the collectors. "Please, come in. I think we have a lot to discuss." The next few hours were a whirlwind of painful revelations. Seated in the living room, Richard was forced to admit the extent of his debts, his failed bets, and the desperate loans he'd taken out to keep up appearances. Tiffany, oscillating between anger and disbelief, flipped through the documents the collectors had brought. "How could you, Richard? How could you lie to me, to our family, for so long?" Upstairs, Olivia and Jacob, drawn by the unfamiliar voices, crept to the top of the stairs, catching snippets of the conversation. College in jeopardy, mortgage overdue, possible bankruptcy. Olivia felt her heart tighten. "Jacob, I think we're in serious trouble." Jacob nodded, his expression grim. "What about college?" Meanwhile, in the living room, Richard made frantic phone calls, begging old contacts for help. More time, anything to stave off the impending disaster. "Carlos, please, you have to help me. I just need one more month." "No, I can't go to the bank. They've already cut my credit line." "Please remember the good old days." But one by one, doors slammed shut. Years of arrogance and burned bridges were coming back to haunt him, leaving Richard with no allies in his hour of need. Karen, drawn by the commotion, entered the room, her eyes widening at the scene. Tiffany quietly sobbing in a corner, Richard shouting into the phone, and two strangers in suits poring over piles of documents on the coffee table. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice trembling. Tiffany raised her tear-filled eyes. "Oh, Karen, we're ruined. Richard, he—" Karen staggered, leaning against the wall for support. The reality of the situation struck her like a punch to the gut. The house she and her late husband had built with love and sacrifice, her grandchildren's future, all at risk. Ethan, who had been watching from a discreet distance, finally stepped forward. "Maybe," he said gently, "it's time to consider some drastic changes." All eyes turned to him. "What kind of changes?" Richard asked, his voice raw from pleading into the phone. Ethan took a deep breath. "Selling off certain assets. The vacation home, for instance, the luxury cars, the jewelry." Tiffany let out a stifled sob, her hands instinctively flying to the diamond necklace around her neck, a birthday gift from Richard the previous year. "No," Richard protested. "There has to be another way. I can fix this. I always fix things." But for the first time, no one in the room believed him. In the days that followed, the sobering reality of the situation settled over the Wright family like a dark cloud. The house, once brimming with laughter and ostentation, now stood silent, weighted by the lies exposed and the tough decisions ahead. Tiffany, her eyes red from crying, spent hours on the phone, canceling credit cards, calling off social engagements, and, most painfully, listing items for sale. Yes, the emerald ring and the sapphire set, too. How much? No, that can't be right. It's worth far more. Richard, meanwhile, locked himself in the study, drowning in paperwork as he desperately tried to find a way out of the financial maze he'd created. Olivia and Jacob, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, offered to look for part-time jobs. "We can help, Dad," Olivia said firmly. "We don't need such a big house or fancy cars. We just want our family to be okay." Karen, sitting quietly in her favorite armchair, watched everything with weary eyes. How had it come to this? Where had she failed as a mother? As the Wright family struggled to stay afloat amid the financial and emotional chaos, Ethan remained a steady presence, providing practical advice and silent support. He knew the worst was yet to come, but he also believed that from the ashes of this crisis, a stronger, more authentic family could emerge. As night fell on the Wright house, bringing with it another day of uncertainty, Ethan pondered the road ahead. The downfall was in full swing, but he was determined to ensure that, in the end, his family would find not only financial stability, but also truth, honesty, and the connection they had lost so long ago. Sunday morning dawned with an uneasy stillness in the Wright home. The family gathered in the kitchen, their faces drawn and fatigued from sleepless nights and mounting worries. Richard stirred his coffee absently while Tiffany flipped through the newspaper, her gaze distant. Suddenly, Tiffany's gasp of surprise cut through the silence. "Oh my God! Ethan, is that you?" They all turned to her, confused. Tiffany, her hands trembling, held up the newspaper for everyone to see. On the front page was a photo of Ethan in a sharp suit, wearing a confident smile beneath the bold headline, "The Secret Billionaire. Ethan Wright Reveals Global Empire." Richard snatched the paper from Tiffany, his eyes racing through the article. This can't be true," he murmured, but his voice betrayed a rising comprehension. The article laid out the impressive empire Ethan had built, a network of tech companies, real estate investments, and venture capital funds spanning the globe. The estimated value of his assets, over $10 billion. Karen, peering over Richard's shoulder, sank into a chair. "My son? A billionaire? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Olivia and Jacob exchanged stunned looks. So that's why Uncle Ethan never seemed stressed about money, Olivia mused. As the family processed the news, Richard began pacing the kitchen, his mind racing. Suddenly, he froze, a look of pained realization washing over him. The Beacon Initiative, he rasped. All those mysterious transfers over the years. It was you, wasn't it, Ethan? Every eye turned to Ethan, who stood in the doorway, silently observing the scene. Ethan nodded slowly. Yes, it was. The silence that followed was deafening. Years of arrogance, condescension, and snap judgments came flooding back in that moment. Tiffany was the first to speak. Why didn't you ever tell us? Why live like someone ordinary? Ethan finished for her, a small smile tugging at his lips. Because I wanted to be loved and respected for who I am, not for what I have. Richard, his face a storm of conflicting emotions, stepped toward his brother. You knew. You knew everything. Our debts, our problems, and you said nothing. Ethan met his brother's gaze evenly. And what would you have done if I had told you? Would you have stopped gambling? Changed your spending habits? Richard stepped back as though slapped. Karen, tears in her eyes, rose slowly. Ethan, my son, Before she could finish, Ethan's phone rang. He glanced at the screen briefly, then silenced it. Sorry, I have a video conference in 10 minutes. Urgent company business. With that, he turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving his family in a state of shock and confusion. The next few hours were a blur. The house phone rang incessantly with reporters seeking statements from the secret billionaire's family. Richard, in denial and desperation, alternated between calling Ethan and cursing him to anyone who would listen. That hypocrite. He left us to sink while he was swimming in money. Tiffany, on the other hand, fell into a stunned silence, mentally replaying every interaction she'd had with Ethan over the years and seeing them now in a different light. Olivia and Jacob, fascinated by the revelation, scoured the internet for information about their uncle, finding articles and videos that detailed his business triumphs. Look, Mom, Jacob exclaimed, holding up his tablet. Uncle Ethan was named Entrepreneur of the Year by Forbes. Karen, sitting quietly in a corner, clutched an old photograph of Ethan as a child. How didn't I see it, she whispered. My own son. As the day wore on, the family slowly came to terms with the truth. The Wright family, who had long seen themselves as the epitome of success, now realized they had misjudged and mistreated the real success story in their midst. In a final act of desperation, Richard began sending message after message to Ethan. We need to talk. Urgent. Ethan, please pick up. Brother, I know I made mistakes, but our family needs you now. All of them went unanswered. Meanwhile, in the guest room, Ethan was immersed in his video conference discussing the final steps of a billion-dollar acquisition. He could hear the commotion downstairs, Richard's occasional outbursts, Tiffany's muffled sobs, but maintained a calm, professional demeanor as he navigated the complex deal. When he finally ended the call, Ethan allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had known the revelation would rock the family to its core, but even he was taken aback by the magnitude of their reactions. Part of him wanted to go downstairs, offer explanations, comfort, and solutions, but another part, the part that had been belittled and overlooked for so many years, wanted them to feel the full weight of their past actions and assumptions. His phone buzzed again, another message from Richard. Please, Ethan, we need your help. Don't let our family sink. Ethan stared at the message for a long moment, his finger hovering over the reply button. Finally, with a sigh, he locked the phone without responding. The truth was out. Now the next move was theirs. Ethan knew the coming days would be crucial, not just for the family's financial future, but for the very fabric of their relationships. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the house, Ethan prepared for another night of self-imposed silence. The revelation had been made. Now it was time to see who among the Wright family was truly ready for change, reconciliation, and above all, honesty. The sun rose on a Wright household that was unrecognizable. The thick silence was broken only by the occasional clink of cutlery and hushed, tense murmurs. Richard, once the proud patriarch, now seemed a hollow shell of himself. He sat at the kitchen table, glaring at his phone, hoping for a reply from Ethan that never came. The doorbell rang again, making him jump. Opening the door, he found his old golfing buddy, Dr. Garcia. "Richard, what on earth is this I'm hearing? Are you really broke?" Richard swallowed, feeling the weight of his friend's inquisitive stare. "Carlos, I can explain." But before he could continue, Dr. Garcia cut him off. "Look, Richard, I think it's best we cancel our game this weekend. And maybe you shouldn't show up at the club for a while. You understand, right? People are talking." And the door shut, leaving Richard stunned. In a matter of days, the social circle he'd built over decades was collapsing. In the master bedroom, Tiffany sat on the bed, surrounded by piles of designer clothes and jewelry. Her hands shook as she held a diamond ring, her 15th anniversary present. "Ma'am, I'm ready to assess the pieces," came a gentle voice. The jeweler Tiffany had called stood at the door, sympathy in her eyes. Tiffany nodded wordlessly, tears slipping down her cheeks. As the jeweler examined each item, Tiffany couldn't help thinking how drastically her life had changed. The parties, the travel, the respect, it all felt like a distant dream. Picking up her phone, she opened a chat with her best friend Taylor. "Taylor, I need to talk. I'm considering leaving Richard." The reply was immediate. "Tiffany, are you sure? After all these years?" Tiffany let out a shaky sigh. "I'm not sure I can forgive all these lies." Downstairs, Olivia and Jacob sat on the couch, laptops open in front of them. "Check this out, Olivia," Jacob said, turning his screen to face his sister. "The Beacon Initiative? The same one paying our tuition. It's Uncle Ethan's." Olivia frowned, piecing it together. "So all this time, it wasn't Dad who was paying for our college?" The realization hit them both. All those thank yous to their father, all those promises to make him proud, all based on a lie. "What do we do now?" Jacob asked, his voice trembling slightly. Olivia closed her eyes for a moment. "I think we need to talk to Uncle Ethan. He should know how grateful we are." In the living room, Karen paced back and forth, phone pressed to her ear. "Ethan, it's your mother. Please pick up. I know we've made mistakes, but we're family. We need to talk." Once more, the call went to voicemail. Karen sank onto the sofa, feeling the weight of years of neglect and misguided judgments. How could she have missed Ethan's success? How had she allowed him to be treated with such contempt for so long? Determined to set things right, she rose and headed to Richard's study. She found him hunched over, head in his hands. "Richard," she began softly, "we need to talk about Ethan." Richard looked up, anger and shame warring in his eyes. "What is there to talk about? He lied to us all these years?" Karen shook her head. "No, son, we lied to ourselves. We judged without knowing, belittled without understanding. It's time to admit our mistakes and try to make amends." In the guest bedroom, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, watching the quiet chaos unfolding throughout the house via discreet security cameras he'd installed years before. He saw Richard, once so confident, now humbled and defeated. He saw Tiffany, tearful, handing over her cherished jewelry. He saw his niece and nephew, engrossed in online searches, discovering the truth about their supposedly failed uncle. And he saw his mother, Karen, struggling to hold the family together. Part of him wanted to go downstairs, to hug his mother, reassure his niece and nephew, even offer Richard and Tiffany a comforting word, but he knew it wasn't time yet. The Wright family needed to face the consequences of years of arrogance and poor choices. His phone vibrated with a new message. It was from his personal assistant. "Mr. Wright, The media is clamoring for an official statement about your family. How should we proceed?" Ethan pondered briefly before replying, "No comments for now. Keep everyone off the property. Ramp up security if needed." Returning his attention to the tablet, Ethan saw Olivia and Jacob approaching his room. There was a soft knock. "Uncle Ethan?" Olivia's voice was tentative. "Can we talk?" Ethan took a deep breath, considering. Finally, he stood and opened the door. His niece and nephew gazed up at him, their eyes wide with a mix of awe and confusion. "Uncle," Jacob began, we wanted to say thank you. For everything. College? All of it?" Olivia nodded, tears threatening to spill. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" Ethan smiled softly, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. Sometimes the true value of something is only seen when it isn't flaunted. You two have always been special to me, regardless of money. As he spoke to Olivia and Jacob, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope for the future. The revelation of his empire had shattered the Wright family's foundations, exposing painful truths and long-buried lies. But maybe from the wreckage, something stronger, more real, could rise. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be more tears, more confrontations, more uncomfortable truths to face. But Ethan was determined to guide his family through the storm, even if, for now, he had to do it from behind the scenes. As the day drew to a close, the Wright house fell into a pensive hush. Each member of the family in their own corner wrestled with inner battles. The consequences of years of pride and denial were just beginning to unfold, and the real test of their character and familial bonds had only begun. In that stillness, Ethan resolved to remain patient. The time for full disclosure would come soon enough, and he intended to ensure that when the dust settled, the Wright family would not only have found their footing, but also each other, in ways they never had before. The Johnson & Wright law firm, once a symbol of Richard's prestige and success, now felt more like a mausoleum for his shattered ambitions. He adjusted his tie, ignoring the fact that it was the same one he'd worn for 3 days straight, and forced a smile at his secretary, Emily. "Good morning, Emily. Any messages?" Emily hesitated, her eyes flickering with pity and discomfort. "Mr. Wright, Dr. Johnson would like to see you in his office. Immediately?" Richard's heart sank, but he squared his shoulders as he made his way to the senior partner's office. Inside, he was met by solemn looks from Dr. Johnson and 2 other partners. "Richard, Doctor," Johnson began gravely, "given the recent revelations about your financial situation and the rumors going around, we think it's best you take an extended leave of absence." "But my cases, my clients," Richard stammered, feeling the floor fall out from under him. "They've been reassigned, Richard. Understand, we can't risk the firm's reputation." Walking out of the building, a box of personal belongings in hand, Richard struggled to keep himself composed. His phone rang. It was the bank. "Mr. Wright, I'm sorry to inform you, but due to your overdue payments, we have to start the process of repossessing your vehicle." Richard ended the call, a bitter laugh escaping. His once prized luxury car was being taken back. He glanced down the street, wondering how he would even get home now, when soon he might not have one. At the Wright residence, Tiffany sat at the kitchen table, paperwork spread around her. Michelle, her friend and an attorney, was explaining the divorce process. "Tiffany, are you sure about this? I know times are tough, but—" Tiffany raised her hand, cutting her friend off. "Michelle, it's not just about the money. It's years of lies, of living a facade. I can't do it anymore." Her hands shook as she signed the initial papers. Each signature felt like sealing not just the end of her marriage, but of the life she once believed in. Upstairs, Olivia and Jacob stood hesitantly outside Ethan's door. After sharing nervous looks, Olivia finally knocked. "Uncle Ethan, can we talk?" The door opened to reveal Ethan, whose eyes held a blend of curiosity and fondness. "Come in." They entered, perching awkwardly on the edge of the bed. Jacob was first to speak. "Uncle, We wanted to thank you for everything, for college, for supporting us." Olivia nodded. "And to apologize for how we treated you all these years, for believing what Dad said." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. Despite everything, these two had always occupied a special place in his heart. He knelt in front of them, holding a hand of each. "Olivia, Jacob, you have nothing to apologize for. You were kids, influenced by what you saw and heard. What matters is the here and now, and the future you choose to shape." Tears streamed down Olivia's face. "But what happens now, with everything that's going on? Our college? Our future?" Ethan offered a gentle smile. "Don't worry about that. Your education and your dreams are safe. They always have been." "Really?" Jacob's eyes, misty, impulsively threw his arms around his uncle. Olivia joined in, and for a moment, the three of them clung together, bound by a bond that transcended money, or even blood. Meanwhile, downstairs, Karen gazed out the window, awaiting Richard's return. Her heart weighed heavy with regret and worry. How had things gotten this bad? How had she, as a mother, failed to see one son's success and the other's desperation? Finally, she saw Richard coming up the driveway on foot, his demeanor utterly defeated. When he entered, Karen embraced him, feeling him tremble in her arms. "Oh, Richard," she whispered, "what have we done?" Richard, for the first time in years, allowed himself to cry in his mother's arms. "Mom, I messed up everything. My marriage, my career, our family." Karen guided him to the sofa. "It's never too late to fix things, son. But first, we need honesty with ourselves and with Ethan." Richard nodded slowly, years of pride and arrogance finally starting to crumble. In the study, Tiffany finished signing the papers just as she heard the front door. Exchanging a glance with Michelle, she took a deep breath and went out to face Richard. The two faced each other in the hallway, years of love, lies, and resentment hanging between them. "It's over, isn't it?" Richard asked, his voice raspy. Tiffany nodded, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Richard, but I can't live like this anymore." In that moment, Ethan descended the stairs, Olivia and Jacob trailing behind him. The Wright family, or what remained of it, found themselves gathered in the foyer, each bearing the burden of their own choices and regrets. Karen was the first to speak up. "Ethan, son, I think it's time we all talked." Together. Ethan surveyed their faces, seeing the desperation in Richard, the sad resolve in Tiffany, the remorse in Karen, and the weary hope in Olivia and Jacob. At last, he nodded. "Yes, I think it's time." As the family headed into the living room for what promised to be a difficult and emotional discussion, Ethan reflected on the path that had led them here. Richard's pride, once the family's pillar, had been shattered. Desperation filled the air, but so did the first glimmer of genuine honesty. The masks had fallen, appearances could no longer be sustained, and in this moment of complete vulnerability, maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for them to rebuild. Not the empire of lies they'd clung to for so long, but something new, something real. Ethan knew the road ahead would be hard. There would be more tears, more painful truths. But as he sat down with his family, ready to listen and be heard, he felt a surge of hope. Pride had driven the Wright family to the brink, but perhaps humility could be their first step toward redemption. The attic of the Wright house had always been a repository of memories, a place where the past gathered dust in forgotten boxes and trunks. Karen climbed the creaky stairs, a flashlight in hand, determined to sort through the family's belongings before circumstances forced them to leave the house. The air was heavy, laden with dust and secrets. Karen ran her fingers over old photo albums, school trophies, and long-discarded toys. Each item told a story, sparked a memory. She smiled sadly as she picked up a small wooden airplane Ethan had built as a child. Then her gaze fell on a box tucked in the attic's darkest corner. Intrigued, she dragged it closer. The box was sealed with tape, yellowed by time, labeled RW Documents. Carefully, Karen opened the box. On top lay a folder marked Project Phoenix. She frowned, faintly recalling Ethan mentioning that name years ago when he was launching his first serious venture. Lifting the cover, Karen's heart clenched. Inside were contracts, printed emails, and handwritten notes, all detailing an elaborate scheme to sabotage Ethan's business. With shaking hands, she began to read. Plan to discredit Project Phoenix, spread rumors of financial instability, contact key investors and plant doubts, manipulate financial data to appear insolvent. The handwriting was unmistakably Richard's. Karen felt sick. How could her oldest son have done something so cruel to his own brother? She continued digging through the documents, each revelation more shocking than the last. There were emails between Richard and a crooked accountant outlining how to falsify financial reports to make Project Phoenix look like a looming failure, contracts with consultants hired to spread negative rumors in the market, even a detailed plan to sabotage a crucial presentation Ethan had for potential investors. Tears welled up in Karen's eyes. She remembered that time, Ethan's despair when his dream collapsed, Richard's comfort, offering Ethan a low-level position in his law firm, an offer Ethan had refused before leaving for the West Coast. At the bottom of the box, Karen found something that made her gasp. A letter from Ethan to Richard, dated just a few days before Project Phoenix collapsed. Dear Richard, I know we've always had different views of success, but I wanted you to know how much your support means to me at this pivotal moment. Project Phoenix is more than a business. It's my dream to change the world for the better. I'm nervous about next week's investor presentation, but knowing you have my back gives me confidence. You've always been my role model, my big brother, who achieves whatever he sets his mind to. I hope one day to make you as proud as I am of you. With gratitude, Ethan. Karen let the letter fall from her hands, sobbing openly now. Richard's betrayal wasn't just a professional sabotage, it was a profound betrayal of Ethan's trust and brotherly love. She stayed there for hours, reading and rereading the documents, trying to process the scope of Richard's cruelty. How had she not noticed? How had she let one son do something so terrible to the other? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the attic's small window, Karen made a decision. She couldn't keep this secret. Ethan deserved to know, no matter how painful the truth might be. With trembling legs, she descended the stairs, the box in her arms. She found Ethan in the library, working on his laptop. "Son," she said, her voice raw from crying, "there's something you need to see." Ethan glanced at his mother, immediately noticing her tear-streaked face and pained expression. "Mom, what's wrong?" Karen set the box on the table. "I found this in the attic, Ethan. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I swear." Concerned and puzzled, Ethan opened the box. As he read the documents, his expression shifted from confusion to shock and finally to deep hurt. "This explains so much," he murmured, barely audible. Karen approached, placing a shaking hand on her son's shoulder. "Ethan, if I'd known, if I'd had even the slightest clue what Richard was doing." Ethan looked up at her anguished face. "It's not your fault, Mom. You didn't know." "But I should have," she cried, tears resuming. "I'm your mother. I should have protected you. I should have seen." Ethan stood, wrapping his mother in a tight embrace. For a moment, they stood like that, united by the pain of this newly discovered truth. "What are you going to do?" Karen asked at last, pulling back to meet her son's gaze. Ethan took a deep breath, looking at the damning papers on the table. "Honestly, I'm not sure. Part of me wants to confront Richard right now, demand answers, maybe even revenge." Karen nodded, understanding the impulse. "But," Ethan continued, "this was a long time ago. Look where we are now. Richard's lost everything. He's on the brink of ruin. And me? Well, Project Phoenix may have failed, but it really did rise from the ashes in ways I never could have imagined. Karen regarded her son with a mixture of pride and awe. "You're a better man than any of us deserve, Ethan." Ethan gave a sad smile. "It's not about being better, Mom. It's about choosing who I want to be. Richard chose envy and sabotage. I chose to stand back up and try again." He paused, gazing out the window at the yard where he and Richard had played as children. "That doesn't mean we can just sweep this under the rug." "Richard has to face what he's done," Karen agreed solemnly. "What do you suggest?" Ethan thought for a moment. "Let's gather the family, all of them. It's time to put all the cards on the table. Richard and Tiffany, Olivia, Jacob. Everyone deserves the truth. Only then can we decide how to move forward." Karen felt a mixture of apprehension and relief. The truth would be painful, but perhaps it was the only path to genuine healing. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow," Ethan replied firmly. "Noon, in the dining room. It's time we have a family meal where no one is hiding anything." Karen nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. She knew the next 24 hours would be pivotal. As Ethan began organizing the documents, preparing for the impending confrontation, Karen silently prayed that somehow her family would survive this final and most painful revelation. As night settled over the Wright house, the air was thick with anticipation. Tomorrow, long-buried secrets would surface, and the real test of their character and family bonds would begin. Alone in his room, Ethan once again looked at the letter he had written to Richard so many years ago. With a heavy sigh, he put it away, mentally bracing himself for the day that would change all their lives forever. The grandfather clock in the dining room struck noon as the Wright family gathered. The tension was palpable, each member sensing something monumental was about to unfold. Ethan stood at the head of the table, a folder of documents before him. Karen, her eyes puffy from lack of sleep, sat silently. Tiffany and Richard, accompanied by Olivia and Jacob, took their seats, exchanging uncertain, anxious looks. Ethan took a steadying breath, his gaze moving from face to face before settling on Richard. "Thank you all for coming. There's something we need to discuss, something that affects every one of us." Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Ethan, if this is about money, I swear, I'll pay you back every cent." "It's not about money, Richard," Ethan interrupted, his voice calm yet firm. "It's about the truth, about the past, and how it shaped our present." Moving deliberately, Ethan opened the folder and began passing out papers around the table. Richard paled upon recognizing them. Where did you get this?" he stammered. "That's not important right now," Ethan answered. "What matters is what's in them. Richard, you sabotaged my first business, Project Phoenix." A stunned silence fell over the room. Tiffany gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Olivia and Jacob exchanged horrified looks. "What are you talking about?" Tiffany asked, her voice trembling. Ethan laid out the evidence, the emails, the contracts, the meticulous plan to undermine Project Phoenix. With every revelation, Richard seemed to shrink in his seat. "Richard," Karen spoke, her voice quivering with emotion. "How could you?" Richard looked at his mother, then at Ethan, and finally at his children. The weight of years of lies and betrayal seemed to crush him in that moment. I was afraid," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan was always brilliant, always had these big ideas. I was the successful lawyer, the golden son. But Project Phoenix? It was revolutionary. I knew if it succeeded, Ethan would surpass me in every way." Tears streamed down Richard's face. At first, it was just to delay him, to give him a scare. But then it spiraled out of control. I couldn't stop, couldn't admit what I'd done. Tiffany stood abruptly, stepping away from the table. "You destroyed your own brother's dream out of jealousy?" Richard nodded miserably. "I convinced myself I was protecting the family, keeping up our reputation. But the truth is, I was protecting my own ego." Ethan watched his brother, years of hurt and confusion finally making sense. You know what's ironic, Richard? The failure of Project Phoenix is what drove me forward. It made me work harder, think bigger. Every success I had afterward was partly because of that initial collapse. Olivia, tears in her eyes, looked at her father. How could you do this, Dad? Uncle Ethan has always been so good to us. Jacob's voice trembled with disappointment. You always taught us about integrity, about doing the right thing. Was that all a lie? Richard buried his face in his hands, sobbing openly. No, it wasn't all a lie. I lost my way. I let envy and fear consume me. Each year that passed, it got harder to admit the truth. Karen approached Richard, placing a hand on his shoulder. Son, what you did was terrible, but we're here now. The truth is out. What matters is what you do from here on out. Richard raised his eyes, filled with regret and shame. Ethan, I'm sorry. More than words can say. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but... Ethan lifted a hand, silencing him. Richard, for years, I wondered what went wrong. I questioned my skills, my judgment. Learning the truth hurts deeply. He paused, looking around the table. But it also brings clarity. I understand now why you were always so critical of me, why you constantly tried to put me down. It was guilt? Richard nodded, unable to meet his brother's gaze. I can't say I forgive you, Ethan continued. Not yet. But I do understand, and I believe people can change, can atone. Tiffany, who had been silent, finally asked, Ethan, what does this mean for everything? Our current situation? Ethan inhaled deeply. It means we have a choice. We can let this revelation destroy us completely, or we can use it as a starting point to rebuild. He turned to Richard. I'm willing to help the family, financially and otherwise, but there are conditions. Richard looked up, a glimmer of hope in his despair. What conditions? First, therapy. All of us, individually and as a family. We have a lot to unpack and heal from, Ethan began. Second, you're going to work, Richard. Not in corporate law, but in something that truly helps people. Maybe pro bono work for those who can't afford legal representation. Richard nodded vigorously. Yes, anything. Third, Ethan continued, total financial transparency from now on. No more hidden expenses, no more secret debts. Tiffany spoke up. And what about the divorce? Ethan looked at her gently. That's a decision for you and Richard to make, but I suggest waiting until after a few therapy sessions before making anything final. Olivia and Jacob, who had been quiet, stepped toward Ethan. What about us, Uncle? Olivia asked hesitantly. Ethan gave them a warm smile. You two are the future of this family. I'll keep supporting your education and your dreams, but I want you to truly understand the value of hard work and integrity. Karen, tears in her eyes, finally spoke. Ethan, you're a better man than any of us deserve. Thank you for not giving up on this family. Ethan met his mother's gaze, feeling the weight of her words. Family is family, Mom, no matter how complicated. Turning to the group, Ethan concluded, the road ahead won't be easy. There'll be tough days, painful conversations. But if we're all committed, I believe we can not only survive this, but become stronger because of it. Richard stood, trembling. I'll do anything, Ethan. Anything to try and fix what I've done. Ethan nodded, extending his hand to his brother. It wasn't a hug, at least not yet, but it was a beginning. Then let's start now, one day at a time. As the Wright family began to process the secrets laid bare, a sense of catharsis filled the air. The lies were exposed, the masks removed. The path ahead would be rough, but for the first time in years, there was a genuine chance for healing and reconciliation. Ethan looked out the window at the yard where he and Richard once played, letting out a breath. He turned back to his family, ready to begin the difficult yet necessary work of rebuilding. The December sun shone on Ethan Wright's impressive Beverly Hills mansion, its rays gleaming off the windows and lighting up the sweeping garden where a beautifully arranged table awaited the family. A year had passed since the revelations that shook the Wright clan to its core. Now they were gathering again, no longer at the old family home, but at the residence of the brother they had once underestimated. Ethan watched from his balcony as the cars arrived. First to pull up was Karen, his mother, her hair now fully gray, but her eyes shining with a warmth not seen in years. Next came Richard and Tiffany, arriving separately but side by side, a silent sign of their ongoing journey toward reconciliation. Finally, Olivia and Jacob, now young adults exuding a sense of purpose and confidence that was evident even from a distance. Once everyone gathered in the garden, Ethan descended to join them. The hugs they exchanged were real, free of the tension and falseness that once riddled their interactions. "Welcome," Ethan said with a warm smile, gesturing toward the table. "Please, have a seat. We have a lot to celebrate today." As the courses were served, Richard cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "If I may, I'd like to say a few words." Ethan nodded in encouragement. "This past year has been transformative," Richard began, his voice brimming with emotion. "Through therapy and a lot of soul-searching, I've come to realize the depth of my mistakes and just how much my envy and insecurities hurt all of you." He paused, looking at each family member. "My work at the legal aid clinic has been a humbling experience. Helping people who truly need it, with no regard for status or profit, has shown me what real success is." Tiffany, seated beside Richard, gently placed her hand over his. "And that's carried over into our family," she added. "Though Richard and I are still separated, we've found a new kind of partnership and mutual respect. Our family therapy sessions have taught us to communicate more honestly and to value what truly matters." Olivia and Jacob shared a look before Olivia spoke up. "Uncle Ethan, we want you to know how much you've inspired us," Jacob continued. "I was set on law like Dad, but now I'm finishing my degree in environmental engineering. I want to make a difference, like you did with your sustainable companies." Olivia smiled. "And I'm combining my passion for business with social impact. I'm developing an app to connect homeless people with resources and job opportunities." Ethan felt his heart swell with pride. "You two are extraordinary. I can't wait to see what you'll achieve." Karen, who had been quietly observing, cleared her throat. Tears glistened in her eyes. "My dears," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "as a mother and grandmother, I want to ask for forgiveness. Forgiveness for not seeing what was happening sooner, for not acting, for letting appearances and judgment overshadow what truly mattered." She looked directly at Ethan. "Especially you, my son. Forgive me for not recognizing your greatness, not just in business, but as a person." Ethan stood, crossing over to give his mother a gentle hug. "There's nothing to forgive, Mom. We're all learning and growing together." Resuming his seat, Ethan addressed the family with both emotion and determination. "I have something to share. This past year of reflection and reconciliation made me realize that true wealth isn't in the numbers on a balance sheet, but in the lives we can positively impact." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I've decided to significantly expand the Beacon Initiative. We'll establish programs for education, healthcare, and social entrepreneurship in underserved communities across the country." The family listened intently, admiration clear on their faces. "But that's not all," Ethan went on. "I want to create a family fund, managed by all of us, dedicated to social projects that reflect the values we've rediscovered this past year: compassion, integrity, and purpose." Richard was the first to speak. "Ethan, that's incredible. How can we help?" Ethan smiled. "Each of you will bring a unique perspective. Richard, your experience at the aid clinic will be invaluable. Tiffany, your organizational skills will be crucial. Olivia, Jacob, Your innovative ideas will help us reach a new generation." Karen, tears brimming once more, said softly, "And I promise to support every step of the way with all the love and wisdom I can offer." As the family discussed the possibilities for this new fund, Ethan allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He gazed up at the blue sky, thinking about life's twists and turns. A year ago, this same family was on the brink of collapse, suffocating under lies and resentments. Now they were united by a greater purpose. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ethan raised his glass. "To the right family," he proposed, "not for the wealth we possess, but for the wealth we can share with the world." Everyone lifted their glasses, the chime of crystal echoing across the garden. In that moment, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace and accomplishment. Success, he realized, was not measured by how many zeros were in his account or how many accolades adorned his office walls. True success was right there, at that table, genuine smiles, understanding looks, and the promise of a future built on love, forgiveness, and shared purpose. As dusk gently enveloped the Wright mansion, ushering in the first stars of the evening, Ethan knew he had at last discovered his true fortune. It was not locked away in vaults or stocks, but in the hearts of those around him, and in the unlimited potential of making a difference in the world, together, as a family.